Richard Walton, welcome to Paper Napkin Wisdom. I'm excited to have you here with me today.
Thanks so much for having me, Govin. Delighted to be here.
Yeah, well, you're coming from far away. You're coming from South Africa, so this is a lot of fun. I love doing podcasts with people from around the world because perspectives are just a little bit different than what we hear always in North America. So that's fantastic. And you shared a really interesting paper napkin with me, and I don't think you're talking about Van Halen when you're talking about this, but it's go back to the '80s to sell better. So why did you share that with me?
So, about 2 years ago, I was asked by a good friend of mine in EO if I would give a talk on B2B sales because she knew that I was spending a lot of my time back then consulting to B2B companies on how to sell better. And what I noticed was that many of my clients were saying that the tactics that they were using weren't working anymore. So cold email, LinkedIn messages. I'm sure you know what it's like. You probably get, 5 of these a day. Hey, people connect. Hey, do you want to buy this? Do you want to buy that? All that type of stuff. And um, what it, and then so the process of putting together that talk, I had to come up with, I guess, something catchy that would really resonate with kind of my thinking about why this problem had arisen and what the solution to it was. And so I'm 50 years old now. So when I started out in sales, you met people for a coffee. You drove an hour and a half to meet a prospect, to shake their hand, to listen to what they had to say, and then you would drive all the way back again. And that's how it was done in the 80s. And then what happened is social media came along and kind of email automation tools and all those types of things. And suddenly salespeople are like, hang on a minute, I don't have to get in a car and drive for an hour and a half to meet someone. I can actually send out 50 of these message things. And you know what it's like in the early days, you get a connection message from a LinkedIn person, and you'd be like, wow, this is great. This person from across there looks really interesting, wants to be my friend on LinkedIn. Of course you accept and you start having a conversation. So it worked really, really well. And then until it didn't. And it's getting harder and harder. Our inboxes are congested and we're just switching off. And I believe that there's absolutely room in technology for sales, but it's worth thinking about how things used to be done, the importance of building really good human relationships. And I believe deeply that a competitive advantage that every single person can have is how often they can meet people in the real world. And obviously that means that you have to really, deeply think about your strategy when it comes to selling. And the obvious one that springs to mind is you not start needing to think about who's going to be within your traveling vicinity that you can go out and meet in person and talk to. And I guess that's what I mean by go back to the 80s to sell better, because essentially it's you need to start thinking about how you're going to meet people in the real world and build real relationships. Um, and I guess a lot of this comes from my kind of area of expertise, which is B2B selling, and in particular, selling higher ticket items. So generally, when you start getting above $10,000, $15,000 for something, the human relationship really matters. And when that comes into play, I don't know of anything better to shorten a sales cycle or to increase the conversion rate than meeting someone in person.
It's so true, right? I mean, sales is the transfer of trust. When you
Yeah.
believe, when you you believe that someone is going to do right by you, even if it's not them, and having that connection with people is a building block to having that. I really, I sort of, I grabbed something you said around a competitive advantage being how often they meet somebody in person, and that's really where cold calling came from, right? Cold calling was calling on someone in person, like knocking on their door. That's what you're talking about, right? Like meeting people face to face, not just on the phone.
I'm talking about meeting people in person. Absolutely. Um, and so I come from the travel industry. I'd just like to give you a little bit of a story, which I think it kind of explains my point quite well. It's in the travel industry, all travel people are really sociable. And most people go into the travel industry, they're kind of extroverts. They love to chat. They go into it because of the lifestyle and travel. Generally, a large proportion of people. Anyone who's listening to this who's spent time in the travel industry will know exactly what I mean. You go to travel conferences, they are a lot of fun. They're similar to EO conferences, actually, to some degree. Um, but the thing that I've heard time and time again, and I'm sure it's the same in other conferences, oh yeah, you won't get any business done until your third conference, as into your third year. Why is that? Because it takes essentially quite a few meetings until people trust you. Now my kind of general kind of feeling is that when it comes to selling, particularly if you're targeting prospects, you need to think about how can you meet someone ideally 3 times in the next 6 to 9 months. I think 3 is the magic number when it comes to building trust and credibility. And it's also, which is critically important, is how you meet them. So you can't just copy the whole LinkedIn strategy, meeting someone and then immediately trying to sell them. Sell to them straight away either. You've got to go in there. I think, a really good strategy is going in there, looking to help, looking to understand, asking questions, dropping any kind of sales mentality from your head, because I think it comes across as inauthentic, and then magical things happen. So I'm a big believer in getting out there, forming connections, offering to help, talking to people, asking for help. I often find weirdly can be a very good way to eventually selling, because you're just trying to understand, asking for help. I'm trying to understand more about your industry. What are people struggling with? That for me is a really good way to start building connections and establishing trust.
That's so funny to hear you say that. Asking for help is a great way for a salesperson to
Mm,
build sales relationships over that 3 time magic number visiting. Isn't that interesting? But if you did that, you'd put yourself in the right mindset to be curious for the answer, and that
exactly.
makes you a better listener. I mean, the whole thing is very
Yeah.
natural if that's
Yeah.
what your intention is, but you've got to really hold that intention, right?
You've got to, you've got to really hold it. So I was talking to a client of mine. I was explaining the concept. He said, but, but do I have to really believe that? And I was like, yes,
Yes, you
you
do.
have to believe it. And he was like, but I don't understand. I said, are you telling me that you know absolutely everything about the industry that you want to sell into? And he was like, no, I do not. There you go. Go out, ask questions, be friendly, help, magical things will happen. I don't know if you've heard of that saying in Silicon Valley, you you ask for money, you get advice, and you ask for advice and you get money. It's
Yes.
it's it's kind of similar to that kind of mindset, I think.
Yeah, that's really, really cool.
Yeah.
So why do you think that magic number, again, it's a mindset shift, and I really want to go through this. You're saying, the question you asked was, how can you meet somebody within your industry within 3 to 6 months, 3 times, and 3 times is the magic number.
Hmm.
A, why 3 to 6 months, and why 3 times?
Um, so I don't have kind of any kind of empirical data to support that. I guess it's based off kind of 25 years of doing it myself. I think if I kind of talk you through my process and how I see it work and how I see it kind of work with, kind of clients and things, the first time you have to adopt the strategy that we just talked about. And that's just generally you're building a relationship. That's it. You're dropping everything else.
Mhm.
Then the next time has to be opportunity. You have to wait for the right opportunity, because you can't go and ask for help again. Now, maybe you get on really, really well and you can meet for a social type of reason, for opportunity. But actually, what you need to do then is you need to monitor and look for a time to meet in person. That may be through a conference, it may be through some other kind of association event, but you have to plan that one. So that's kind of the number two. And what's interesting, the second time you meet someone is that people are a lot more friendly. Even if it's in an event like a conference where the people are expecting to be sold to, they're happy to see you, because hopefully, people love being asked for help and they love
Mhm.
being listened to, right? We all know that. I mean, because it's rare that we come across that in the real world, particularly the listening side of things. So when that happens, you then kind of, you at that second meeting, stuff comes up, and quite often people will start saying, So what, what do you actually do? What's happening? Oh, and by the way, I should add, there needs to be a lot of other activities that are going on to support that second meeting. So ideally, you've got some great content that is being pushed out. People are seeing your activity. So you're building you're building that trust and credibility. So they kind of, by the second meeting, they've heard of you, they know what you're doing, they know what you're selling. So they probably will almost certainly ask you questions about things. And my strategy, again, is still to offer help and quite often to try and give free value to the problems that they're facing. And then the third
So
opportunity
before we
is
leave that
much,
one, Richard, let's just
yeah,
stop for a second because I think this is really interesting. The first thing you do is ask for help,
yes,
understand, like really go in there and say, hey, I don't know everything that you're facing in your industry. Be very genuine and very curious, right?
exactly, 100%.
Really, but you have to be in that mindset. It has to be genuine. It can't be coercive. You can't have, oh, and here's a watch for that, right? Like it's just literally you're there. The second one is waiting for an opportunity. It's more planned and organized, but it really sounds like between the lines, I'm hearing you say that you have to take action from that first meeting. It has to be aligned with it. And, maybe you offer, hey, I heard somebody in the time that we last met, you said this thing. I think I understood it this way. I have this contact for you. Would that be helpful to you? Is that what you're saying? You sort of follow the breadcrumbs based on that conversation a little bit?
I mean, that would be ideal. Doesn't always happen, but again, I think just looking for ways to give value is super useful. If that can't be done, essentially what you need to look for is just an opportunity to kind of bump into them. I call it bumping into them.
Okay.
So it's not kind of planned because that looks suspicious. Oh, and normally it's in around some type of in-person event, which again, goes back to what we were talking about at the beginning, the importance of focusing on a local area. So it's very easy to bump into them at a local kind of event.
Okay.
And then quite often they will start bringing things up. They will start asking about what you're doing and what you're selling, and then you can also give value there. Of course, in the gap in between those two things, hopefully there'll be lots of other opportunities to engage and offer value.
Okay. Got it. All right.
Yeah.
So now we're at number three, the third visit.
Yeah. So this is the bit that I think you have to approach with extreme caution. So, and it really depends on, on the prospect, on the individual, because this is the time that you are going to potentially, and I say potentially, because quite often if you do this well enough, they'll come to you, is when you actually reach out to them to say, hey, based on what we've been chatting about and based on our conversations, and I just want to emphasize here, your relationship isn't just based off those two interactions. There's a lot of other stuff, hopefully, that has gone on in between those things. You can then reach out to them and say, based on all the stuff that you've told me, I think that this might help you, and this is why. And it's hyper personalized to what they've told you. So that's the kind of, I guess that's when you start saying to them, I think that what I'm selling might be really helpful to you because of the things that you've told me that you're struggling with. So that's my general process.
And you're saying those are the three in persons, but on top of the in persons, you're leveraging all of those other digital tools,
Exactly.
not as a replacement for the in person, but to augment it, right?
Exactly. Exactly. That's the key. And it's the combination of those activities, and the thing that the things that I kind of I like to use is you proving your own expertise, and then also what I call external validation. So someone else saying that you're an expert. If you can get those two things going on at the same time, that's super useful. So let's talk about the first one, proving your own expertise. You're producing, content. It's generally around content and thought leadership posts, blog articles. Maybe you're pushing out, maybe you're giving talks at associations, you sit on a board, whatever it may be. You're kind of doing those things that say that I'm the expert in this particular area. And of course, your expertise should be really, really focused around the pain points of the people that you're targeting.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of you proving your own expertise. And then there's the external validation, which is really, really important, maybe more important than proving your own expertise, because that's someone else saying you're an expert. And a little bit harder to do. I think, some of the obvious ones that come to mind, if you've got the budget, I'm a big believer in PR. I think, as human beings, if there's an article about someone in some type of media that we trust, that's very, very powerful. Very
Mm.
powerful. And I think probably becoming even more powerful with the amount of fake content or repeated content out there. Certainly, I know that's the case for me. But sitting on panel discussions at key events, generally, that can be very helpful as well. If you're sitting alongside other experts at a prestigious event, people then will immediately think, well, he wouldn't have been asked unless he was an expert in his field. That can be very powerful as well. So those kind of two things, it's very, very important to, the end result.
Yeah, I think that, what's really neat. We're of the same vintage, so this term will sound familiar, but what you're talking about is shoe leather, right? I mean, when old
Yeah.
sales, I remember when I was learning sales, people would talk about shoe leather. You got to wear out a few pairs of shoes along the way. And
Mm.
now in this hybrid environment where people are in their cocoons, that's not the place to build relationships. It's not intuitive. The thing that I'm also really interested and intrigued by is you're talking about, generally speaking, high ticket items. You're not talking about $10 subscriptions. You're talking about 5, 6, 7 digit sales. And it feels like for those, people feel like, oh no, I've got to have a more white glove, surgical email response. I need to build a sales funnel. I need to build these kinds of things. You're saying the opposite. You're saying you need to build relationships, and a few strong relationships are better than this big funnel, right? Am I getting that right?
Well, I think ideally, you've still got a big funnel, because actually, sometimes I think this can take a while.
Yeah, it's not an
So
either or. I meant the importance needs to be on the relationship.
100%. I'm a very big believer in that. I'm sure there are some exceptions. And I think the one that springs to mind is if you've got a very, very strong brand, and that could be the fact that you've got, I don't know, 2 million followers on LinkedIn, then, that's probably very different, because the trust and the credibility, all those. So what we're talking about, and the reason for kind of, going through the shoe leather, I forget the exact term that you said, is it's actually just about building a relationship, which is about building trust,
Mhm.
and credibility and all those types of things. Now, you can get around that if you've got a very, very strong personal brand. So maybe you've written a book. Maybe you've got, a very, very well listened to podcast, or you're a public speaker that's paid 50,000. There are things, I think, that skips a lot of those steps. And so when people are approached, they go, I know this brand, I know this person, I know the product, I see it everywhere. I don't necessarily need to meet someone in person. All those necessary steps. Maybe they still need to meet a sales rep once or twice, but maybe you don't have to do all the other steps. I think that's probably the only exception
Yeah, and
that I
that's
can.
that's a ton of social proof that you need to have, right? And
Yeah, and
and you're still
very
burning
expensive.
shoe leather to build the social proof. I mean, there's no magic wand that creates this.
There's no magic wand. I'm pleased you brought up the magic wand thing, because one of the things that I find frustrating when it comes to sales, particularly B2B sales, is people seem to think that there is a magic wand out there.
Mm.
And um, I get quite irritated when I, look online. This new sales tool is going to cut your sales cycle in half. It's going to do this and do that. And I just don't see it ever working. It doesn't exist. The magic wand is actually getting very focused on who you're going to meet, putting together a local strategy, and putting in the hard work and building those relationships. And what's so funny is when I talk to founders, I mainly work with founders, they say to me, but yeah, that's how I started my business. I said 90% of the time, they said, that's how I started my business. Well, there you go. And then why did you stop? Well, my company grew too fast. I didn't have time to do it. Started getting involved in operations. Essentially, it's actually just going back to the stuff that you've already done in the past.
Yeah.
Um,
Do you remember that there was a book that came out, a billion years ago? It was called Guerrilla Marketing, and it was all
Yes.
about this idea that sales was simple but hard, and
Yes.
hard because it involved, doing the things that, responsibly, consistently doing the things that built the business from the ground up, which was flyers and windows and this kind of thing. So this magic wand approach to sales, do we do we get away from wanting to do the work and looking for a magic wand because sales is hard, building relationships is hard, and sometimes people are just get shy about it? What do you think the reason is? Because you're right, everybody's looking for a magic wand, everybody's looking for an easy way to gain market share rather than doing it the way that everybody knows works.
Yeah, I think I think hiring salespeople is really, really hard. I think it's the hardest people to fill it, hardest people role to fill in any organization. I think a lot of founders who don't come from a sales background don't like salespeople. I can say this as a salesperson. So if if you know, I quite often work into companies. Where are the salespeople? Oh, they're in their back room over there. You know, we let them work from home. Well, we're a tech company, we're a product company, we're obsessed with the design. Sales, it's got that slightly kind of dirty association to it. And so, I actually talked to a client earlier, and he was saying to me that tech people, particularly in his line of work, which was kind of cybersecurity, it's like, salespeople, we don't like salespeople. And he actually said that we don't like it. I think because they're hit on all the time, by this aggressive. And actually, I think it's probably been made even worse over the last 3 years by these, non-stop kind of people trying to sell to you all the time digitally. It's made people retreat even more. And we are just very, very aware of being sold to all the time. So I think hiring salespeople is hard. I think founders who are involved in the sales process and who are good at it try and remove themselves from it without getting the right structures and strategy in place. And what's so interesting, and quite ironic actually, is when they do get the structures and the strategy in place, they actually start enjoying the selling again.
Mm.
And it's not often, it's they don't mind the selling, it's everything else that comes with it as well. So sorry, I might have gone off a bit of a tangent
No,
there,
no,
but
no, but I think it's really interesting because we're talking about the magic wand, and then you said founders, after they get the strategy in place and the structure in place, they actually start enjoying selling again. And my question that I wrote down right away when you said that is why? Why do you think that's true?
well, I know for me personally, it's because selling is also customer research.
Mm.
And if you're good at selling, which in my opinion is asking a lot of questions and listening, you're going to find out how to improve your product or service. As a founder, I'm, yeah, I want to sell and make some money and get more customers, but I'm also passionate about improving my product or my service. So you're killing two birds with one stone. I mean, that's priceless.
Yeah, that's so cool. And you know what? That's really cool that you said it that way. You get passionate about improving your product or service when you do this the right way with the right strategy and right structure. When you start asking for help about the industry and really build that relationship. But isn't that where you started? Like, think about what you started off your story. You were doing B2B sales, consulting for organizations, and then you were asked to give a talk within the entrepreneurs organization, which then forced you to get kind of curious about your process and become even more passionate about it. Like, is that right? Like, am I jumping ahead? Am I getting that wrong?
You're bang on. Actually, it's so funny this conversation. It's you brought up so many things that I've talked about today because I'm preparing a talk for an EO WhatsApp group called Grit, and it's about kind of businesses that are struggling at the moment, and I think it's in a month's time. And I've been really thinking a lot about in the last. I mean, a lot of my talks are similar, but I always spend probably 10 to 12 hours tweaking it for the audience. I don't know of any better way to improve your product or service or to get you thinking about your business than the thought of standing up on stage and telling people about your area of expertise. I mean, it really forces you to think deeply. So yeah, I mean, that's what got me thinking very deeply and about what I do and what the solutions are. And I and also be completely open, you know, and I guess to prove my point of how I build relationships, I spend probably 4 hours a week, maybe five, giving my time for free to potential prospects. They wouldn't even know that they were prospects of mine because I'm offering to help people with their sales problems. And it's a lot of time, but goodness me, do I learn a huge amount from the process. Not all of them, a small number become clients, but it's invaluable to me what I learned from that exercise.
That's really powerful. So tell me about, how has your practice, how has your business changed from the time that you started to apply this 80s selling approach, the old shoe leather method of getting in front of people and
Yeah.
speaking with them, to now? Like, what has evolved for you?
Well, it's quite a new business, so it's probably evolving every single week. As you know, you've been there, you've done it yourself. So I would still kind of call us in the startup phase. Um, I think probably the the I'm almost embarrassed to say this after our conversation, but the biggest evolution is we were I'm a little bit anti-tech. So my business partner, I'm 50 years old. I'm a sales guy, so I'm very anti-tech.
Yeah.
I go around with a piece of paper and I write down contacts in. But my brother and business partner is 10 years younger than me, and he's very much into his tech. So I think if anything, what we are looking to do, and you mentioned, a key word is how do we augment what we are telling our clients to do with tech? So how, and I think probably the biggest thing that we're looking at is prospect scoring. And that's pretty hard. So how are we assigning scores to prospects? So a prospect is, to me, as someone who hasn't even shown any buying intent and has potentially hasn't even contacted you. How do we understand where they are in the funnel? And using tech to do that is probably being the biggest change. And we haven't nailed it yet, but we're getting really good at it. And that's extremely exciting.
That's very cool. It's really funny that you say that, we talk about our age often. One of the
Yeah.
things that my uh, a group of friends used to always say is, like, when there was a group text blowing up, they could say they could almost count down five, four, three, two, and go is going to call, because I'll pick up the phone rather than keep on texting when
Yeah,
something is
yeah,
blowing up. And and so I think we're kindred spirits that way. Richard, this was really powerful. I think that there's a lot here. And I think that really, um, what was really exciting for me to hear was how passionate you can become about a client and about your learning, right? You get to learn if you
yeah.
go and make the client your professor by asking for help, helping understand the industry. And if you can't help them with it, maybe you're still going to be able to apply it to the industry. And that
100%.
opens up a whole bunch of doors. And that's right, right? Like, that's what you're really getting at.
100%. Just magic happens.
Yeah.
It's I'll just one final thing. So in this talk that I give, I always finish it off with what I think the three most important KPIs are for B2B sales. I won't say all of them, but the number one is CPW, which is coffees per week. How
Coffees per
many
week.
coffees per week are you having? That's
That's
it.
fabulous. Love it. And I hope to have one coffee with you somehow in the future.
I very much look forward to them.
Thanks, Richard.
Thank you.